Okay, you've made it to part 4 of the chapter 34 Flipped Classroom. In this, we will go over the Russian Revolution just really quickly. We'll be doing more with this in class. And then also we'll be going over the end of the war and its aftermath. And guess what? The United States is going to get involved just at the very tail end of this. So 1917 was a very pivotal year in World War I. First of all, you had the Russian Revolution, which effectively takes Russia out of the Allied side. America is fighting with this, well, technically not with, but with the side that the Russians were on in this war. But we get involved after they leave, or right about when they're leaving. Also, the United States enters the war because of unrestricted submarine warfare, which was supposed to be stopped, but the Germans reignited it at the end of the war. Germany was exhausted. They had used all of their manpower from ages 16 to 50. These people were all involved in the war, and it was just becoming too much, both in terms of strain on their civilians, people were starving, and also in terms of their soldiers. And also, there was a huge influenza epidemic. There's a really good special on PBS about this and its effect in America and how whole cities were basically quarantined. But from 1917 to 1918, this killed more people than the actual war. 20 million people. This is also called the Spanish flu. So, with that type of an epidemic, people were really motivated to end the war. So just again, I'm going to very rapidly run over the Russian Revolution because we're going to go over this in class. So Russia was completely decimated by the war, and military collapse and bread riots led Nicholas II, who was the Tsar, to step down in early 1917. This February Revolution put in place a provisional government that was dedicated to reform, but really poorly prepared as the Tsar to fight the war. The provisionalist government to ignore the popular demands to end the war doomed it from the start. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks, was smuggled into Russia by the Germans. And he understood the Russian situation much more clearly than had Nicholas II or the leaders of the provisional government. Although a dedicated follower of Marx, Lenin believed that the industrial workers desperately needed the leadership of an organized party to reach revolutionary consciousness. A revolution could be made instead of just started organically. His motto of peace, land, bread summed up the desperate Russian situation. They wanted peace with Germany. They wanted land for the peasants, and they wanted bread for their hungry bellies. I mean, these people were in dire straits. And this was really pragmatic of him. So he signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which was a huge sacrifice for the Russians. It ceded Poland, the Baltic countries, and Ukraine to Germany. As you saw in those earlier maps, it was a huge chunk of territory and a huge amount of people. Millions of people, in fact. This forced Russia out of the war and proved to be as harsh as the later Treaty of Versailles. But that wasn't it for the Russians. They continued a civil war between those called the Reds, who were the Soviet communists, and then the Whites, who were more supporters of the moderate government. You might even say the Tsarist government. And this lasted until 1921. This is, you could also say when the party of the Bolsheviks, like that's the Reds. The Bolsheviks are the Reds. So how did America get involved? Well, by 1917, the main combatants were really exhausted and bankrupt, and the entrance of the United States was kind of actually a surprise. While the United States President Woodrow Wilson viewed a French and British victory as essential for the furtherance of democracy, it wasn't until the Germans reissued this unrestricted submarine warfare that America joined the war, and they started to sink American ships. The Lusitania was actually sunk much earlier, but it was used as a rallying point to get America back involved. Again, it was sunk a lot earlier than when we actually got involved in the war. There was also the Zimmermann telegram, which was sent by a German ambassador to Mexico's ambassador saying, look, we need to get America, we need to attack America so that we can end this war, and you can get all that territory you lost in the Mexican-American War. This was intercepted by the British. So in 1917, like I said, things were looking really awful for the Allies, but they were looking even worse for the Central Powers. The rebellions of the French, like the French mutiny of 50,000 soldiers in 1917, were representative of the frustration and anguish of the common people. But Germany was even in a worse position. They were basically the last of the Central Powers that had any big force remaining, and they were completely exhausted, like I previously mentioned. The Bulgarians, Ottomans, and Austro-Hungarians surrendered on 11/11 at 11/11, so November 11th, 1918. And then we enter the peace process. This was known as the Paris Peace Conference, and the biggest piece of this is the Treaty of Versailles. Despite Wilson's insistence, Wilson was the President of the United States at this time, on a fair and open peace, which was one of his 14 points, the combination of Anglo-French fear of the Germans and Wilson's own political problems, he didn't have the Congress behind him. The Congress wanted nothing to do with Europe at this time. This resulted in a really dictated treaty. It was dominated by the French, Great Britain, and America. And again, like I said, they all had huge interests. Great Britain just kind of wanted to build its imperial empire and make sure that Germany couldn't get involved again. But they didn't have as much anger as the French, because the French farmland and the French land had really been utterly destroyed by this war. And the United States was looking more for a lasting solution. No Central Powers were represented. No Germans, no Ottomans, no Austro-Hungarians. This treaty does not do a very good job of settling the original causes of World War I. It doesn't settle nationalist rivalries or disputes, and it doesn't settle colonial rivalries or disputes. And the treaties were incredibly harsh on the Central Powers, as we'll learn in class. Wilson accepted a much harsher treaty than he would have wanted in return for the establishment of the League of Nations. So the League of Nations was created by diplomats in Paris, and it had 42 original member states that were 26 non-Europeans. It was the application of Wilson's concept of self-determination, where your nation should be created and run by people who are like you. Now, this League of Nations, excuse me, back that up a little bit. So let's stop the League of Nations here. And then the self-determination was another one of Wilson's 14 points, where again, a nation should be governed by people who are like the people in that nation. So Wilson wanted to decolonize, basically, some of these places that had been a part of the Ottoman Empire, and also these few places that had been a part of the war. But Europeans didn't exactly do that. Not exactly. They didn't do it at all. Instead, they created the mandate system. The mandate system made the rest of the world think that the Europeans were intent on re-establishing imperialism in the Ottoman Empire under a different name. So we'll look at that on a map in just a second. This concept of self-determination that I was referring to earlier did, however, get spread by this war because of the many people who were also at this peace conference, such as Arab, Chinese, and Vietnamese delegations, and including Ho Chi Minh, the future leader of the movement against the French in Vietnam and then the Americans. The Arabs, who had fought with us against the Ottomans and the Chinese, they were completely ignored at this peace process. And this, combined with Russian anger, an American turn of isolationism, and an unstable new map of Europe, doomed the world for more horrors to come. So here you can see the map of Europe and its changes. Germany gets a lot smaller. Poland is created by the war, as well as the Slavic states. This used to be Austria-Hungary. See you later, Austria-Hungary. You are now two separate nations and much smaller, and all of these other places get some independence. And then these are the mandates. So this is, the green is the old Ottoman Empire, then the British protectorates are in pink, and then the mandates are here. And as you can see, Israel is part of those mandates, as is Syria, as is Iraq. And this might actually lead us to some of the issues that we are seeing today. That's the end of the PowerPoint, and I hope you enjoyed learning about World War I and its aftermath. And we'll discuss further in class issues involving Russia and also issues of Ottoman independence. Have a great spring break.